Hi there, my name is Neil Blevins, and this tutorial is called Layers of Light and Dark. So layers of light and dark are a tremendously important technique in composition. They help you both lead the eye, and they also make sure that individual objects can be seen separate from each other. So this lesson discusses these techniques in broad terms, and gives a number of suggestions on how to use layers of light and dark to make your imagery stronger compositionally. So let's start off with the basics. Your goal is to create layers, or planes, of dark on top of light on top of dark for two purposes. So the first one is to allow each layer to be separate from the other layers, and then the second reason is to lead the eye through the composition. So here's a simple example, just using triangles and a soft brush to create a set of mountains around a lake on a misty morning. So in any composition, the eye will be first drawn to the area of most contrast. In fact, last week I did a contrasts and composition tutorial, which I posted on my YouTube channel, and there'll be a link to it in the description. It's worth checking out. It'll get into more detail about this stuff. But simply in this situation, we're going to focus on contrast of value, which means areas where the brightest and darkest values sit side by side, which creates a point for the eye to go to. So in this situation, the point of most contrast is right here. As an aside, by the way, since the strongest area of contrast, the focal point is right here, this might be a good spot to place a human figure. But anyway, back to the main point. The next area of high contrast is here. And so it's likely that's the second place that the eye will look. And then the third highest spot of contrast is probably here. Although at this point the contrast between the light and the dark is pretty small, and so you might want to use a different type of contrast to draw the eye to the area. Like, for example, let's place ourselves a building over there. So notice how we've created all these layers of light and dark, and here's a little diagram showing it off. So every time it says D and every time it says L, it's light and dark, and it separates all the different layers from each other. So one layer doesn't become difficult to identify next to the rest. And it also leads the eye along the composition, going from this spot all the way down here and then over into this spot over there. Also note, dark and light are relative. So dark doesn't always mean black, and light doesn't always mean white. So a mid-gray can be dark if it's next to a white background, or a mid-gray can be light if it's next to black. So there are many different ways to create these sort of layers. You can use lighting, you can use rim lights, you can use bright and dark local color, regular color, shadows, or haze and fog. And now we're going to go into a couple other examples to show what I mean. So here's an image that's a little bit more complicated, but has the same basic idea going on. And so this image is from my Inkbook project, and it's an image of Landis, the character here, standing in front of the Citadel. Now you can see in this image the different layers of light and dark. So the front rock area here is dark compared to the light of this fog over here. And then even though the light of this fog is pretty similar to here, this is considered dark because it's beside something that is very light. So again, as I mentioned before, the darkness here is dark compared to the thing it's beside, not necessarily its value over the entire image. And then over here you can see another spot where you have dark and light going on. So when creating layers of light and dark, one of the best friends the artist has is fog, or mist. And you'll notice here that there's a little bit of fog in between the character and these rocks and the building back here. And this is a version of the image I just showed you, except it has fewer effects on it, so you can see more the raw image itself. And notice what happens if I turn off that fog. So if I get rid of it, now it's really hard to tell where this rock ends and where the building begins. Now another way I could have fixed this problem of layering is to lighten up the building, like this. And that certainly fixes the problem, but this has the downside that then the building here is brighter against this background, and so you have less contrast between the building and the sky. Which might be fine, that's not that big of a deal, but in this case I really wanted the building to feel very silhouetted and very mysterious, and so it made more sense to instead keep the building darker but then have this fog in the front. So here's another image, and notice the different layers of light and dark going into the background. So for example, up top here, we have this area is dark, and then there's a little bit of fog here, so that goes light. And then the fog disappears going back to dark, which kind of leads the eye along here. And then notice how the character here is dark, but then on the edge it goes light, so leading the eye there. And then here you have dark here, and then light at the edge of this rock, and then dark again at the rock that's further away, going to the light of this mist, then dark again, and then light here, which is right behind the main focus, which is this object floating in the cave. And the other thing I wanted to point out is, as well as the fog, which I used in the last image, another technique that I used here is this rim light on the character. So that's another way to go from something that's dark. If you have something that's dark against something that's dark, if you put a rim light in there, that can help separate those two objects. And the rim light is kind of justified because there's a bunch of light coming from here, and so if the character is taller than these rocks, it's likely that some of this light would spill out and create this rim along this character. So now it's time for the masterclass. And when it comes to layers of light and dark, nobody beats the DPs and lighters of Pixar. So looking at a frame of a Pixar film is truly a masterclass in layering dark and light shapes. And perhaps there's no better example than the Cars trilogy, since the main characters are basically these giant reflective shapes. So let's check out this image right here from Cars 3. And then check this out. So we have the bottom area here that is dark on Cruz Ramirez's face. And then it goes from the dark there to the light here on the bottom lip, so you can see the lip that's separate from the bottom. And that makes it easier to see the lip moving, which is vital for the acting. Then the light lip here is against the darkness of inside of the mouth. And then that's against the lightness of the upper teeth. And then that goes dark again above the teeth here, which then moves to light on top of the hood. And then if you go right to the top of the hood before you get to these eyes, you'll see that it goes dark again. Then it goes up to the pupils in the windshield, and that's light. And then above is something that's not dark in the sense that it's not as dark as, say, underneath here, but it's darker than the eyes, and so that's another dark area. And then this dark area goes against this really bright blue area in the background. And then here's an example showing the placement of light and dark to make sure that you can see the cars separate from the background. So for example, over here, you can see that there's a rim light going on the side of Cruz, and that light goes against the dark of the background. And so they very specifically did not place a light background here, otherwise this half of her would sort of disappear into the background. So they did the light and they did the dark. Or actually more likely the background was dark, and what they did was then make sure to put this rim light on to make it light. Then here's another example where you got the light hood against the dark background of this car, and you'll notice that the car starts off darker up here and goes lighter up there. And almost certainly it's dark down here in order to contrast with her right here, this light part. Then up here, even though this is lighter than the bottom of the car, it's still dark compared to the background, which is over here, so that you can read this car in front of this background. And then if you go to McQueen here, you have the dark of the top of his head, and then the light of this haze that's coming out of this light back here. And I can almost certainly promise you that this was placed very specifically in order to make sure that he popped from the background, this atmospheric effect back here. And then one last example, again, another rim light you can see over here, and that rim light almost certainly was placed there in order to bring him out from the darkness of the background, much in the same way as Cruz had it going over there. Anyways, hopefully this shows you a few ways that you can use layers of light and dark to make your composition, first of all, more dynamic, second of all, to lead the eye around the composition, and then also to make the composition easier to read by making sure that objects that are overlapping each other stand out from each other so you can see where one ends and one begins. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and if you did, please visit neilblevins.com and go to the art lessons section where I have a whole bunch of different tutorials on subjects like this. And also feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you'd like to be notified the next time I post a new video. So thanks once again.